All right, everyone, let's jump on into chapter 19, the American Empire. So we've got a lot to go through in this chapter. I know we had some technical difficulties, in our last session, so I was unable to get through the last part of that slideshow. Excuse me. So I'm going to do my best to try and get through everything, all the key points. Again, this is never a replacement for actually reading the chapters, but hopefully this will put a few things in perspective. So much of this chapter is about the American Empire, trying to getting into our imperialistic mindset, kind of socially, politically, what's happening, how are we moving through, what are the ideas, what are people thinking about this, what do the American people think about this, how are we being told to think about this, what's shaping policy. So we're going to discuss a lot of all of that. So we're going to start off with Americans kind of going into China in 1900. So basically, in 1899, you had the Secretary of State, John Hay. He kind of came up with this idea about the open door policy, where he says, well, all Western powers have to have equal access to Chinese markets. So he believed that we needed to go in pretty much take over, because if we don't, some of the other world powers at the time, Japan, Great Britain, Russia, etc., could, kind of come in and carve China up into little, groups for themselves. And we didn't want that to happen, because we wanted to be the ones to do it. Well, under President McKinley in 1900, he sent the U.S. Army in to put down the Boxer Rebellion, which we talked about it a little bit. I'm going to go back over it. So now, mind you, he did not have congressional support to do this. He didn't have any permission under any congressional authority. Just as a president, this is the first time you see a president going in using their executive position to override or bypass Congress to do something. Well, the Boxer Rebellion was a movement that was opposed to, foreign businessmen and missionaries operating in China. So the Chinese people weren't having it. It's like, I don't care what you Westerners came up with. This is China. It's not how we get down over here. So they were not open to allowing the West, particularly America, to come in. I also want to point out that in each case, we do this kind of twofold. First, we try to go in nice and softly with hey, we just want to be your friends. Hey, we're going to send some missionaries over. We're going to help you heathens get civilized. We're just spreading the gospel of Christ. Nothing to see here. We're good guys just coming to help you out. And while we're doing this, we're also going to establish schools and hospitals. We just really want to share our Western medicine and our ways of doing things. That's kind of the soft sell. And if you go into an area that, let's say, is deprived of certain things, or feel like they're very impressed with, some of these Western things that they have to offer, then they feel like they can kind of get that foothold in that way and then take over from there. Well, in situations where the people are saying, no, we have our own religions, we have our own, medicine, all over Asia, they and we are now coming into what they do, the Ayurvedic, medicines, different herbs and things like that. So you're like, we don't need any of your stuff. Keep that over there. Well, when that doesn't work, when the soft sell doesn't work, then we come in with the military. And again, what you're going to see in a theme here as we look at each place we go into throughout this chapter, mostly there is no congressional or official U.S. Initiative to go in with the military. So McKinley's action did set a precedence for U.S. presidents to order American troops to go into places, okay, without, the Congress's approval, okay? So one of the first areas we went into is the Guano Islands. So we had the Guano Island Act of 1858, and basically what that is we started telling just Americans, people who wanting to settle or whatever into different areas, hey, go into any area that you find guano deposits. And for those of you who don't know what guano is, that's a real nice way of saying bird poop. Okay, which is extremely rich in minerals and things like that. So bat droppings, different birds, seals, and the like. And you're going to find that in islands, on many of these islands. So they were encouraging people to go into these, islands in the seas and pretty much take over. Well, in this case, you still don't need Congress, because now you just have, Americans settling in different places, so that nothing to see here, nothing to involve the government about, right? So, remember the filibustering movement from the same time period of the Americans taking Latin America and the Caribbean territories, very much the same. So these acquisitions were kind of the first, what we would call insular or limited, unincorporated territories that we were bringing into the United States. So we were bringing them in, but they were not actually part of the United States officially, right? So this act, although little known, offered it set the precedents for future American, the textbook calls it acquisitions, but let's call it what it is, land theft. Okay, so it sets the tone for what we're going to do going forward. So the Guano Island Act of 1850, I'm sorry, I have something like that in my throat, guys, sorry, of 1856 sort of kicks it all off. Well, here we go on into Hawaii. So the first American missionaries, once again, we started with the missionaries, send in the missionaries. So they came into Hawaii in 1820, and then of course we talked about China, and they first went there in 1830. So the missionaries, though, often worked right alongside with the businessmen. So let's not get this twisted. This has nothing to do with let's spread the gospel of Christ. This is not really what this is. That's the kind of the deceptive piece that's used as the excuse to get that foothold in. Well, once they were there, they set up the oligarchy, where you had which is group rule. So the oligarchy is a group rule. You had five called the Big Five, and they were, and you do need to make sure you do jot this down, Alexander and Baldwin, American Factors, Castle and Cook, C. Brewer, and Theo Davies, which later is known as Dole Fruits, okay? So they were all joined in 1851, and they became the Big Five. This is what the white Americans are called the Heole by the Hawaiians, and this is an elite, very powerful group of people who run everything, from the political standpoint outside of the U.S. Okay. All right, let's see here. Mexico, let's move right on into Mexico. So we had Porfirio Diaz, the president there. He was, at the time, very progressive minded. He wanted Mexico to expand and to really become a world power, if you will. Looking at the fact, he wasn't wrong. They had the land, they had the resources, they had the natural and raw resources. What they lacked was some of the infrastructure to be able to move things from one end of the country to the other, like so the railroad systems and things. So they were really very keen. He was very keen on bringing those things in. And to do that, you were going to need some outside money. So he was willing to have a few American investors come on over, and he was going to use the money that they brought to, kind of help his people. Well, that wasn't really what the Americans wanted. As we know, we really wanted to take it over. And I'm just being honest, this is what we do. So there was a regime change, if you will, because they said, he was a dictator. He was very authoritarian and, some different things. And I don't know. I wasn't there. I never met the man personally. But everything that I've looked at from a historical standpoint, really, that's not, he was definitely Mexico first. And the powers that be in America, the West, didn't like that. We didn't like it. So we allegedly, because I'm still looking for the smoking gun on it, I think all historians are, looking for that information that really proves that a lot of the civil unrest, which led to him being overthrown, was mostly, from planting, from people, sending in people to take over, because we do that quite often. Okay, so more and more so once that happened, more and more American businessmen called in for military intervention to protect their investments from any radical new leadership. So we're saying, oh no, Diaz is now been overthrown. We need new leadership in Mexico. We need leadership that's going to be friendly to our, terms and what we want. Okay, even though you're not Mexican, you're American. Stay on your side of the border, right? But no, we want to have access to the resources and so forth. So we need somebody who will play ball with us. Well, President Woodrow Wilson was instrumental in assisting the democratic process that brought in Francisco Madero in 1913. Well, that didn't last long as the water to get hot. It didn't take but a minute, because Victoriano Huerta executed him. Said, no, we're not going to have a plant from Woodrow Wilson being installed into our government to just give the whole country away to America. He wasn't having it. So Woodrow Wilson started trying to put pressure on Huerta to step down, and saying, oh no, he was, elected properly and so forth and so on. And Huerta was like, I'm not having that. We're not going for this. So no. So there was nothing Woodrow Wilson can really do, about Huerta. So something happened in April of 1914 in Tampico, where the Mexican forces mistakenly arrested some American soldiers there at the port. And Woodrow Wilson was like, aha, I have an excuse now to push and invade, or, to put a strike against Huerta. So he ordered the occupation of Veracruz and persuaded military actions against Mexico before getting any congressional approval. But he was like, I can justify going in now. Okay. So allegedly, the story was, oh, well, we have to go in and occupy and do these things because they're going to get, Huerta is getting guns and weapons of mass destruction or whatever. He's getting these things from Germany. Wink, wink. So that's the excuse that's being used. So next you turn around. So the Huerta government did fall, towards the summer of 1914. And the American occupation did last until November, when Venustiano Carranza was then able to take power. And he was a rival of Huerta. He was also a lot more friendly with Woodrow Wilson. So, this is not going to go down again without some consequences. So enters one Pancho Villa, right? He goes in and he said, no, we're not having that. He is what was called a radical supporter and rival of Carranza. And so he went ahead and said, you know what? This is what we're going to do. Instead of trying to fight against Carranza and the entire U.S. military, we don't have the manpower. We don't have the, the gun power. We just don't have that. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to attack all of the holdings of Americans in Mexico. So that's what they did. They started raiding like the town of Columbus in New Mexico. And, they did kill over a dozen soldiers and civilians. True. I mean, there's always going to be some casualties in a war. But rather than an all-out face-to-face war, like I said, they were going in, taking over and burning down these companies and businesses that the the American investors had. Okay, so Wilson didn't like that at all, so he ends up sending in General John J. Blackjack Pershing. Like I said, these people have the coolest names. But he sent him in to, try and get hold of Pancho Villa and kill him because he was just doing too much. I mean, he was a real thorn in their side. Well, he tried for a year and never could catch Pancho Villa. He was always being, eluded by him. So a couple other things started happening. So in addition to Blackjack never being able to get his hands on Pancho Villa, and by 1917, you've got a full-on war going on in Europe where we are needed. Wilson couldn't keep up and fund both of these, actions. So he had to kind of leave Pancho Villa alone and go ahead and join World War I. Okay. Let's see here. Going into the Middle East. So in the Middle East, Americans started again with a lot of the missionaries, right? Going in. Their big things were education, science, humanitarianism, and all of that's being led again by your missionaries. Some of the first Protestant missionaries arrived in 1819, and they were able to establish themselves in almost every area in every country in the Middle East. Now, one of the things that did kind of come out of it is sort of a Western style education system for universities. So you saw like the Robert College in Istanbul, Turkey. You have the American University of Beirut and the American University of Cairo. All of those getting started and, flourishing. Okay. Spanish, American, and Philippine War. So here's what you've got going on in a nutshell. We know that ever since, Christopher Columbus, set sail here, America or Great Britain, we've always had beef with Spain. We've always been fighting with Spain back and forth, So all of the areas that Spain initially had, we did whatever we could to get those areas, like we ended up purchasing Florida and et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of area or territory where the Spanish was in the New World, eventually the U.S. was going to try and get their hands on it. So they were able to do this kind of backdoor. They didn't come straight out to a fight with Spain. No, and not initially. What they did was, since all these areas that were under Spanish rule, all through what we call Central and into South America, from Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, like all of these areas were under Spanish control. Well, now these folks are all fighting for their independence from Spain. So here comes good old U.S., because we're such amazingly good people, big brother, we are helpful. We're going to support the weak and defend and be a champion. Right. So we go in, we help the Philippines, the folks in the Philippines and Manila and so forth, to battle against Spain and, to help them, quote unquote, get their independence. Same thing in, like I said, Puerto Rico and some other areas. Now, we know that wasn't really what our objective was. Our objective was to help them get Spain out the way so now we can be your new colonizers. Yay. So that's exactly what happened. So when these conflicts, kind of are really going on, the world stage begins to question now American imperialism, because again, throughout this entire time, from the Revolutionary War, up until this time, so by this point it's about 150 years or so, we had been trying to promote this idea or image of ourselves as being the just the real good guys, like I said, willing to be the champion of the weak, defender of the poor, the meek, the downtrodden, etc., etc. When in actuality, we are just trying to position ourselves to become the next oppressor of the people, and really take the resources that are available in those areas. So some questions were being asked like, our foreign interventions and the taking of territories isn't that antithetical, meaning kind of like contrary to what we say we're all about. Like, you're making all these claims about how we're the good guy, but in actuality, we're actually worse in many ways than the Spain and Portugal and some of the other areas that we're going in. Okay. The Cuban spark, that's another area that we see, some issues in. The Cubans are trying to fight against the Spanish to get their independence. We come in there. A couple of things that I did want to, I'm not going to go all through folks like Valeriano Weyland and, some of these folks. Make sure you read that in your chapter. We mentioned it a little bit in class, but I'm going to keep on moving through for time. Free Cuba or Cuba Libre. So all of these things are going on as well. Also, the main incident where on February 15th, an explosion tore open a ship, sent it to the bottom of the sea. And what ended up happening is we start seeing a rise of what's called yellow journalism. So that's when you have journalism that's basically based on sensationalism. Okay, so it's a kind of maybe a crude exaggeration of something, and it's done as a ploy to sell papers. I think you guys could appreciate that now as clickbait. When you go on YouTube or whatever, they'll have some really outrageous title that you're like, what? For real? And you'll click on it just to, like, what are you talking about? Just to find out what they're talking about. And it doesn't have anything to do with that, or it nowhere near to the level that they tried to make it seem in the title. So that's what you had here with yellow journalism. Okay. When urgent negotiation failed to produce a mutually agreeable settlement, this is for Cuba, Congress officially declared war on April 25th. All right. So again, war with Spain is pivotal for a couple of reasons. One, we are able to continue to weaken Spain and exert our dominance over them because we are America. And it really starts to solidify in our minds at the turn of the 20th century, just how good we are, just, our dominance, our, power on the world stage. We're no longer just that fresh little baby country, had to fight King George, and throw some tea into the harbor. We are a force to be reckoned with. And by taking down the Spanish naval fleet, which was one of the strongest in the world, by being able to do that, that really bolsters your confidence, in your might, in your power, in your war prowess. All right. So you feeling yourself. Okay. This is what's going on. We feeling ourselves at this point. All right. Also, when the Spanish lost Santiago de Cuba on July 17th, then the two nations did agree to a ceasefire. Like we said, okay, surrender, throw up the white towel. So we ended up going into a Treaty of Paris in December of 1898. So make sure you read through that a little bit more in detail. But yes, so that's how we ended up signing the Treaty of Paris. Okay. And at the same time, we took over Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines when we beat up on Spain a little bit. So again, back to that American confidence. So for the American people, this is again shaping our national identity of who we see ourselves as. In addition to what the rest of the world may see us as, but how do we see ourselves? So we start having this idea that, hey, hey, get out of my way. I just got back from the USA, and if you don't get out of my way, I'll kick you out of my way. Do y'all remember that, playing that on the playground? Or am I just really, really old? But that was a little ditty we used to play and sing, while you're jumping rope or whatever. and that sentiment. So that was what was really starting to be solidified at that point. So you also had influential Brooklyn minister Lyman Abbott. He actually declared that Americans were an elect people of God. That's what he said. So you start putting in this idea that not only are we going into these other areas, we're supposed to go into these areas. It's the Christian thing to do, to go into these areas and to take their land and their resources, subjugate them, the people who are there, and force them into being a Protestant. That's what it's all about. That's what we should be doing. And God wants us to do this. So this is the idea, the mentality, and keep in mind that your preachers now, your churches, who is running the churches now by this point? We already started talking about how Carnegie and the Gospel of Wealth and, this idea that they were donating, under philanthropy to these school, to the churches and to the schools. So now you had Carnegie and Rockefeller in charge completely over the messages that are being sent out through churches and the curriculum that's being taught in school. So of course it's all going to be rah, rah, go America, go. That's what we've got. So you had Senator Albert Beveridge of Indiana. He saw the American victory as an opportunity for imperialism. All right. So he said we have a mission to perform and a duty to discharge around the world. This is what we are telling ourselves. This is the idea. So even from the political standpoint, this is the message that's also being driven home by Teddy Roosevelt, right? And we're definitely going to get into him a little bit more. We talked a lot about the annexation of Hawaii and kind of what was going on with the Philippines and the Philippine-American War. We talked a good deal about that, but I won't go into too much on that because we did have that wonderful exercise. And don't forget, each group is responsible for posting their findings in our little discussion board. Okay. So then there was this, so questions start coming around the imperial debate. So debates about American imperialism centered around questions of national identity, the role of the United States in the world, and concerns about self-governance and racial identity. Because while we try and tell everybody else what to do, we can't figure out what to do here. Okay, we have whole groups of people who we are oppressing, lynching, killing, stealing from, stealing their land. We're doing all of that here and then trying to still take the moral high ground as though we are God's chosen people as the American folks. Okay, so many people frame the Filipino conflict as a Protestant civilizing mission, while others said, no, it's American imperialism, and it's simply the expansion of the kind of never-ending westward American expansion. So everybody understood that all of this is part of their idea of manifest destiny. Like, you're not going to give me the banana in the tailpipe. I understand what this is. So you kind of had two schools of thought, but even with that, you still had other people who were saying they recognize it as opportunities in the Philippines to gain access to Asian markets. So either way, you're still getting the same result. But some people said, oh yeah, this is a good thing. We're doing this because it's, the good Christian thing to do. It's civilizing these people, et cetera, et cetera. But others are saying, no, let's call it what it is. Okay. Let's see here. Theodore Roosevelt, I talked about him just a little bit. He was very, very big on American imperialism. So he kind of starts first as the assistant secretary of the Navy, and then he becomes vice president and finally president, right? And, he was a major proponent, big supporter of imperialism. So one of the things he did, even as a president, is really strengthening our naval power. So his focus was on developing the American Navy and Latin America as strategic areas. It did have some long term consequences that were going to come from that. But he did advocate for the annexation of Hawaii for several different reasons. One, it was within the American sphere of influence. It would deny the Japanese expansion and limit potential threats on the West Coast. So, all of these strategic reasons that they're coming up with, saying, okay, this is why we really do need to secure Hawaii and annex them. It'd be an excellent port for battleships at Pearl Harbor, and it would act as a fueling station on the way to pivotal markets in Asia. So in fact, Hawaii would do in the South Pacific what Utah was doing for westward expansion, kind of giving that last stop, gas and grocery run before we move on to the next place. So there's a lot of that going on. One of the things that I want to talk about with Roosevelt is that he also coined the phrase, speak softly and carry a big stick. So what that's all about is, hey, you know what? We can say the nice words. We can be friendly and talk nice to people, but they all know we are the baddest boys on the block. We've got the best Navy. We have at this point, we are showing that we have the strongest military. So you don't have to boast or bully or say anything outwardly, because you've got the big stick. And that's really that really solidified who we are, even in our own minds. So a couple of things that he used as well is the Roosevelt corollary, which is kind of to the Monroe Doctrine of 1904, proclaiming that U.S. police power in the Caribbean. So now you on the other side in the Pacific, now you're over here in the Atlantic, in the Caribbean, right? So it added the right of the United States to preemptive action, through intervention in any Latin American nation in order to correct now administrative and fiscal deficiencies. How are you gonna go and correct what's going on in somebody else's country? The very audacity, the unmitigated gall. Well, if I tell you, we some folk, we some folks. Okay, so this is how the U.S. acquired Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, as U.S. naval bases. Okay, take a look at the gunboat diplomacy and the dollar diplomacy. I'm not going into as much in that at this point, but I do want you to take a look at those two. Women and imperialism, because we always got a little role for the girls, right? So one of the things with U.S. imperialism, it focuses on, just as much on the economic and cultural influence as on military and political power. So it offers a range of opportunities for, guess who? White, middle-class Christian women. So if you were that, white, middle class, Christian woman, there were a lot of opportunities for you to help push and support the initiative there of spreading imperialism. So people like Margaret MacLeod, who literally, kind of went all over Europe and, into any English speaking country. And, to push this idea of, American womanhood being this, very dainty, soft and sweet, so forth and so on, the ideals that they were pushing about womanhood and so forth. So that was really, really big. So women also served as missionaries, teachers, medical professionals, even as artists and writers. We definitely had talked about a couple of books that women, were writing that were inspired by and helped to transmit the ideas of imperialism. Okay, so here we go with that. The concept of civilization, which is rooted in economic progress and gender divisions, it also played a significant role in justifying imperialism. So, according to the racial theory of the day, humans progressed through hierarchical stages of civilization in an orderly, linear fashion. So you had Caucasoid at the top, your white people, that's where we get Caucasian or Caucasoid. And then you have Mongoloid, you have like your Asians and what am I trying to say? Well, just everybody in your Asian world. And then, of course, at the very bottom, you have Negroid. So, of course, blacks are the most undeveloped, farthest from the evolutionary standpoint as, along that hierarchy. So these ideas of racism are very much locked in with imperialism as well. So even as we look in, just like all over India and different places where we have like color caste systems, and that's the first place that came to my mind. But where you actually have the lighter you are, the higher up you are, the better jobs, better access to social, economic, political things in society. Although the farther down you are, the darker you are, the less the lower the jobs. You had to do the worst jobs a lot of times in society. And, you were just on the bottom, socially, economically, across the board. Only Europeans and Americans had attained the highest level of civilization. So now you even go into not just race, but now the classification of your country. So Europe and America, so even though you have, you may have people who are lighter in complexion in other areas, they're still not, in that, along that hierarchy, okay? Social and technological progress had freed women of the burdens of physical labor and elevated them to a position of moral and spiritual authority. So as you start to have a little bit more technology, women don't have to do, some of the things that were considered women's work, become a little bit easier. I don't have to go down to the river to fetch water. Water is running right into my house now, or, right from my well, or whatever the case may be. So those things are changing and giving women a little bit more time. Well, if you are a white middle class Christian woman, then that left you a little more free time to engage in these different type of activities, which promotes imperialism. Okay. White women were seen as symbols of American civilization and vehicles for transmitting American values. Okay. Now, it is to be noted that not all women supported imperialism, with some actively opposing imperialism due to concerns about violence, democracy, and racial antagonism. So it's interesting because the very same causes, or the same work, if you will, that women were engaged in during the antebellum period or pre-Civil War, still much of the same type of activities they're engaging in, just under a little bit of a different topic, so it's not, am I going to be an abolitionist or not? It moves beyond that. Now it moves into the idea of imperialism. So for white women like Jane Addams and Josephine Shaw Lowell, anti-imperialist activism aligned with their work against violence and in support of democracy. Black female activists viewed imperialism as a form of racial antagonism, which we just talked about, it is, and saw parallels between the treatment of African Americans at home and the Filipinos abroad. That also includes the Hawaiians. Again, we're talking about people of brown in color, okay? Ida B. Wells also viewed her anti-lynching campaign as a kind of anti-imperialism activism as well. So when she was on the trails talking about stop lynching us, she was also linking that right to imperialism, all right? We've talked a lot about immigration. So folks were coming over, where they were coming from, why they were coming, some of those ideas. We definitely want to get into that. There was an idea called nativism too, where between 1870 and 1920, over 25 million immigrants arrived in the U.S. with new groups like Italians, Poles, Eastern European Jewish people. They were making up a larger percentage than the German and Irish who had come earlier. Well, nativists opposed mass immigration due to concerns about immigrants' fitness for American democracy, job competition, and the introduction of radical ideas. So nativism itself is protecting the interest of native-born inhabitants against those of immigrants. So many Americans, often earlier immigrants themselves, because mind you, all of these people immigrated here. They chose to come. They immigrated. So unless you were Native American, you were an immigrant. But if they worried that the arrival of even more immigrants would result in fewer jobs and lower wages. Sounds like some of the same rhetoric and arguments, whether they're valid or not, some of the same things that we are talking about now. So there were calls to limit immigration, which led into some things we call xenophobia. So xenophobia is the fear of foreigners overall. That term, I think, was first applied to the Chinese immigrants, but it kind of encompasses all foreign-born folks, all right? We also had the Chinese Exclusion Act while we're talking about that. So California led the way in immigration control, targeting Chinese immigrants based on racial inferiority and economic corruption. Californians accused Chinese immigrants of racial inferiority and unfitness for American citizenship. They also claimed that they were economically and morally corrupting American society with cheap labor and immoral practices such as prostitution, right? Immigration restrictions was necessary for the Caucasian race of California, as one anti-Chinese politician declared. So take a look at the Page Act of 1875. That's the Page Act, P-A-G-E, Act of 1875, and of course, going into deeper, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Okay. Under the immigration laws, we had passenger laws. We talked about the Immigration Act of 1882. So let's take a little bit of a look at that. Let's see here. Talked a lot about the Catholics. So we get into, but that comes back around too with, again, the Catholic assimilation. So keep in mind, with a lot of the Europeans coming in during this time, many of them were still Catholic. Yes, you did have some who were Protestant, but a good number of them were Catholic. So, and then, there's always been some anti-Catholic sentiment. So, take a look through, because I want you to, make sure you take a look at that. I don't want to give too much of it away, because I just put out, as you see, if you check your email, you also saw that I put out your extra credit opportunities. And some of this is going to go lockstep in that. So definitely read through those pieces. So to what extent should Catholics become more like native-born Americans? So you've got Germans, Italians, Polish, Mexican immigrants, right? They resented the dominance of the Irish and the American Catholic clergy. So there was a lot of, even within Catholicism, some infighting from the ethnic groups, okay? Then you had conservative versus liberal Catholics. So there was, like I said, there's a lot of different divisions that are going in. So just because someone says, oh, well, these are Catholic people, it's not a monolithic, idea. We all understand politics, so, that intersection between the big four, social, economic, political, and religion. They have different intersections. Okay, so even though, yes, we are all women, we don't see things the same way. We're all, I'm, black. I don't see every black woman doesn't see things the exact same way. So there's a lot of that same thing going on, even within like the Catholic groups. So in 1899, you have Pope Leo the 13th. He sent a special letter to an archbishop in the United States, and he reminded the Americanists that the Catholic Church was a unified global body and that American liberties did not give Catholics the freedom to alter church teachings. So this is really a big thing, because it's like, just because you're all in America, I'm the Pope. This is how we run things. This is how we do it according to the catechisms and all the different tenets of Catholicism. And I don't care if they're here in the Vatican City or if they're in Coldwater, Mississippi. America, you do not get to dictate how the teachings of the church go. Now run tell that. That's basically what Pope Leo the 13th told them. So conservative Catholics believe the Pope had sided with them. So the American encounter with the Catholicism and immigration testified to the complex relationships between native-born and foreign-born Americans and their place in the world of empire and immigrants. So in conclusion, just a lot of imperialism going on, a lot of taking of lands, most of it without any congressional buy-in or approval. And of course, that's done strategically as well, because again, the image that we are pushing out about ourselves, that's in direct conflict. So we can't, from a country, from a government standpoint, go in, taking people land, even though that's exactly what we were still doing. We just did it in different ways. Okay. Well, that concludes chapter 19's overview. I hope you all enjoy it. And like I said, make sure you read some of those things, especially some of those areas that I called out specifically. All right. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.